Good afternoon, ladies and
Oh,
gentlemen. I must say it's something quite interesting to speak after such an interesting presentation. But anyway, my name is Mpho Oliphant, and let me just start by thanking President Ragusa for inviting the South African Embassy to come and do a presentation here in this event. I do hope that throughout this presentation, you'll be able to see what South Africa is about, and most importantly, you will also be able to see how we can work together, whether you're a student or a company or an organization representative here. The topic of my presentation today is, of course, doing business in South Africa, but I have decided to focus on the cultural aspect of doing business in South Africa. And I will do this by trying to answer or refer to 5 different points. The first one being the importance of understanding culture when doing business abroad. The second one being an analysis of South Africa. There I will take you through the microenvironment, the macroenvironment, as well as a brief history of where we come from as South Africa. And then I will, of course, talk about Italy-South Africa relations. And this will be totally different from what he said about the DRC. And then I will touch on available investment opportunities, and I will conclude by highlighting just a few cooperation possibilities that we have in South Africa. I think the most important thing before we can say anything is to just make sure that we understand culture the same way. I mean, culture is a word that we use every day, but we cannot take it for granted that our understanding may be different. So just to make sure that we are all on the same page, I would like to start off by quoting Mr. Gert Hofstede, who's one of a very world-renowned authors and publishers on cultural issues. I'm sure there are some students here who are doing arts and culture, and probably they know him. What he described culture in a very simple way. He says, culture is the software of the mind. And in this era of technology, I'm sure you know that we have different softwares now. We have from Windows to Android to other operation systems. But basically, culture is what makes us work. How do we live? How do we conduct ourselves? What do we believe in? What are our ethics, our beliefs, our values? And it's very important that when doing business with other countries, you understand how that country works, so that you can end up making profit in that country and not close down in a very short run. Here are some of the keywords that have to do with culture, but I would also like to highlight that the reason why I decided to speak about culture is because there's a very positive relationship between culture and the success of businesses. I mean, culture affects everything that the business does, from company laws, from HR policies, from the people the company interacts with, starting from the suppliers to the employees to the contractors. You have to know as a company who you'll be working with in a foreign country, and most importantly, the kind of people you will be working with. And there are quite a number of reports about companies that ignored cultural aspects when doing business abroad, and some of these companies, unfortunately, did not last long. The first one I would like to mention is Nestlé. As you know, Nestlé makes quite a number of products, ranging from chocolates to foodstuffs. But in their baby formula product, they decided to penetrate the African market. But when they did their initial research, they did not focus on the fact that in Africa, the level of literacy is quite low compared to other countries. And they also did not focus on the aspect of sanitation. I mean, as you know, in Africa, most people don't have access to basic goods, basic necessities. I mean, we will take it for granted here in Italy that we have electricity every day. But in some African countries and in some parts of African countries, electricity is just a luxury. So obviously when you sell a product like baby formula, which has to be mixed with boiling water, you already have to make provision for families that cannot afford electricity. But unfortunately, Nestlé somehow missed that important aspect. And as we speak, in some African countries, there is some sort of unhappiness about Nestle and its milk formula products, because there are even some NGOs that are saying Nestle indirectly wanted to kill some African babies because they did not emphasize the importance of using boiling water when preparing milk for babies. In fact, there are some families who used cold water, and as you can imagine, some of their babies didn't have good health in the end. And then another company that I would like to highlight as an example is Walmart. I mean, Walmart is a well-known supermarket selling relatively low-priced products in the US. So in around 1996, 1997, the company decided to come to Europe, and they chose Germany as one of their hub. They wanted to kickstart their investments here in Europe by investing in Germany. Also because, I mean, in terms of European countries, Germany is one with the very highest rate of per capita income. Fine, they came, they did their research, but what they did not focus on was the German culture. The fact that in America, for example, the store is open 24/7, whereas in Germany, opening a store 24 hours, 7 days a week is something somewhat foreign. And therefore, just having a plan to have a 24/7 company in Germany was already something that was really strange. And then on top of that, there was also their habit of, in fact, their policy of making sure that all their cashiers or their service staff in the shops, they have to smile to people. I mean, for some countries like South Africa, smiling is not a problem at all when you're in the service industry. But I mean, for countries like Germany, part of their culture is just not to smile to strangers. It's nothing negative or anything. It's just the way they are. It's their culture. So now, having a cut and paste approach, which is what Walmart tried to do in Germany, by just trying to do everything they do in the US in Germany, it did not work at all. In fact, after a few years, the company had to close down. And another issue was that the Germans generally prefer, small companies as opposed to very huge companies like Walmart. So in the end, Walmart failed in Germany. This is just an example by big companies, but I mean, culture is important, whether you are a small company that wants to have a joint venture partnerships abroad, or whether you want to have a foreign direct investment abroad. Now, before I can discuss some aspects of South African culture, I would like to give you just a brief overview of South Africa. South Africa, ladies and gentlemen, is a very interesting country. I'm very happy to be South African. We call South Africa a rainbow nation. This is the term that was coined in 1994 when we got our democracy. But before we got our democracy, we had very long periods of suffering in my country. I mean, from 1948 until 1994, there was a period called apartheid, which was basically racial segregation within the country, where white people were oppressing black people. That was a very dark moment of not only South Africa as a country, but the African continent at large, because we were being oppressed not just by foreigners, not just by people from other countries, but we were oppressed by one of our own. And during that period, of course, there were groups of people and individuals and organizations who were working towards the end of apartheid. And in the end, they won. And in 1994, that's when we got our democracy. For the very first time, we had elections where South Africans of all colors, all beliefs, had to vote and choose who they wanted as president. And as most of you know, that's when Nelson Mandela was elected as the first ever democratically and black president of South Africa. And through that time, we also were negotiating a constitution that would cover all South Africans and make sure that all South Africans are treated equally. That is why in South Africa, we are a multiracial country. We have different types of religion. There's no one religion that's better than the others. We have 11 official languages. And when I say official, I mean you can use them even when doing a presentation like I am now. Because we just want to make sure that everyone, after the terrible history we had, everyone is treated equally and there is no oppression whatsoever. In fact, we are also one of the countries that recognize same-sex marriage because we believe that we should not discriminate against people just because of their sexual orientation. And that is just the background of South Africa. And after our elections then in 1994, ladies and gentlemen, that's when we established what we call Brand South Africa, which was basically aimed at promoting South Africa as a brand. Because we were a new country, we had to make sure that we spread a new message across the world about who we are. And on a macro environment level, we had friends all over the world who were helping us through the apartheid era. We had friends from Cuba to China, even in Italy. I mean, in the early 70s, we had the African National Congress, which is the ruling party now. We had them, we had very close friends in a city called Reggio Emilia, up north in Emilia-Romagna. So even the people of Italy are very close to us in terms of supporting us when we were suffering. And of course, we also have memberships to different regional, continental, and international organizations. And what I need to emphasize about South Africa is that because of our history, because of the discrimination we had and the oppression we went through, if there is one thing that the South Africans are really sensitive about, it's being oppressed. And oppression does not just happen in terms of killing people, it can also happen in terms of culture. I mean, we have a phrase here that I've noted down in my presentation. It's called ethnocentrism, which basically means that it is a belief that one's culture is somewhat superior to other cultures. So in South Africa, when we do business with foreign countries, we really, really guard against being oppressed in terms of culture. We want to make sure that when we form partnerships with businesses, they respect our culture, and we also respect their culture and make sure that we find a common ground, of making sure that even though we are foreigners or we are working with foreigners, we can still work together peacefully. That is why we are interested in doing business with companies that are able to adapt to our culture and also that are flexible, to other views and other ways of doing business. And of course, now, in terms of South African culture, this is just a summary of our culture, my country's culture. We have the constitution that I have spoken about, which is the blueprint of how we operate. Like I've already said, we do not want discrimination in South Africa. Whether it's for young people, the disabled, women, we just make sure that everyone has access to all the business opportunities that we have. That is why then, after adopting our constitution, we also amended our different types of policies to ensure that all our people are given equal chance. I know it's nothing worth mentioning, but it's important because we can't take anything for granted when it comes to culture. English is the business language. Although we have 11 official languages in South Africa, we prefer to do business in English just to make sure that we all understand each other. I know that maybe this is a bit foreign to some Italian companies because in Italy, most people speak Italian, although you have, different dialects. But in South Africa, you actually have languages that vary according to regions. So we just use English to understand each other. And then we are also very formal in the sense that when we do business, we sign contracts, we have meetings. In fact, we prefer having face-to-face meetings so that we can also build trust with business partners that we are partnering with. Our working hours are from 8 to 4:30. we don't have siesta, unfortunately. And then our peak holiday season is just Easter and Christmas period. So throughout the year, it's business as usual. And what I really need to emphasize is that because of our history, we have adopted quite a number of policies to ensure that all those people who were previously disadvantaged, these are the black people, these are the colored people, these are the women and disabled people. We have specific policies to make sure that these people get preference in some of the business deals that we make. So when you want to do business with South Africa, you need to make sure that you understand that some of the policies will actually require you to work with black people or women or disabled people or even young people. But there is one word in South Africa that basically describes everything that we do, and this is Ubuntu. Ubuntu it's a Zulu word, one of our languages. It's a Zulu word which basically means, you know, Ubuntu, I am because we are. So it's a summary of how we see ourselves as a country. The fact that because we are where we are because of other people. Even when doing business, we want to make sure that we do not forget our neighbors. That is why we are members of different regional and continental organizations to make sure that even though we are advanced, more advanced than some of our African countries, we actually take them along with us on our path of prosperity. And then a short summary of South Africa's economic profile is that South Africa at the moment is Africa's largest economy. We had for the past few years, we were number 2 because of Nigeria, but because our currency is actually strong, we have now returned to being the biggest economy in South Africa, in Africa rather. And we are the biggest because of how our economic system is structured. We have a very industrialized system in South Africa. In fact, we are the most industrialized economy in South Africa. And I know that Mr. Massey, in his presentation, spoke about infrastructure, he spoke about corruption, he spoke about other things. But I'm very proud to say that when it comes to South Africa, we have world-class infrastructure, from road to air to sea. Our ports are very well advanced. We have very good infrastructure. That is why we are one of the biggest economy in South Africa. And of course, when it comes to international organizations, we are a member of quite a number of big organizations such as the G20, such as the BRICS formation and other notable organizations. And what is important to note is that in my country, like in many other African countries, there is really, really a significant growth of the middle class. So because of the growth of the middle class, as you can imagine, there's higher demand for high quality goods, high quality life, and just a better life as a whole. And because of that niche market, there is a demand then for more partnerships with foreign companies, such as Italian ones. And my country has quite a number of industries that we are good at. I will highlight some of them towards the end of my presentation. And then, as I've already said, we have Ubuntu. We are because we all are. So we are a member of 3 organizations. Sorry about that. Okay, we are a member of the Southern African Development Community, which is this area here. And this regional organization has 15 countries and a market of 200 million people. And we have, as the region, signed a free trade agreement, which means that you can actually use South Africa as a gateway to this region. And then on top of that, in 2015, we signed another agreement with 3 regional blocks, which Mr. Mikelo has already mentioned in his presentation, which is the COMESA and the East African Community. And all these highlighted parts here highlight the number of countries, which is 26 countries all in all, that have signed a free trade agreement, which will be implemented in a very near future because our parliaments are still rectifying them. So this means that when you do business with South Africa, you do business with other 26 countries. And in fact, when you do business with South Africa, you do business with all 54 countries, because like I've already said, we have a very sophisticated infrastructure and we are able to reach all the 54 countries easily. And then this is what the economist said in the article of, I think 2 months ago, that Africa is a market of 1.2 billion people. And this holds promise, very huge promise, because 1.2 billion people means 1.2 billion opportunities. This is something worth thinking about. And then I'm just going to list a few reports about what different organizations have said about South Africa's economy in the recent past. And the first one is the IMF World Economic Outlook that was released in 2016, which actually states that Africa as a continent is a very conducive market for foreign investors because the average growth rate in sub-Saharan Africa is actually higher than the global average rate. I mean, as we know now, we have a very different and difficult global economic climate in the sense that demand is going down. But when you go to Africa, at least you can be assured that you have assurance of growth despite current economic limitations. And then the Ernst & Young, which is one of the auditing and accounting companies that operates across the world, in May this year, they did a report called the Africa Attractiveness Index. And what this report basically does is that it looked at 5 areas in Africa. And through these 5 areas, it basically studied how the long-term ability of resilience that countries have despite challenges. And what they looked at, for example, they started looking at governance, they looked at human development, they looked at infrastructure development, they also looked at diversities of economies. And in the end, South Africa was ranked as the first out of all the countries studied in Africa. And what this means is that South Africa, because of its special economic profile, is a very good market for foreign direct investment. And in the past, it has actually been ranked as #1 in terms of foreign direct investment. And then Mr. Ragusa has already mentioned this study that was done by the World Bank in terms of doing business. And he said, I think you said Italy ranks the 50th? Yes, and here South Africa ranks the 73rd. It's the second country in sub-Saharan Africa, just after Botswana. Botswana is a neighboring country of ours, also in the SADC region that I've already mentioned. So in terms of doing business, South Africa is the country to choose. And then the other aspect of this presentation is to show you a number of Italian companies that have actually invested in South Africa and that are still there. These are just some of them. I mean, I'm sure you can recognize some of the logos here, from the automotive industry to the chocolates, Ferrero Rocher, to Prada. In fact, Prada opened their largest store in the world in South Africa. This is also because as Africa is going, there is more intra-Africa trade, which means that there are more people coming from other African countries to do shopping in South Africa. So Prada saw this opportunity and they now opened their biggest market in the world in South Africa. And I must say it's doing quite well. And also on top of that, we also have quite a number of renewable energy companies that have invested in South Africa. These here are just some of the South African companies that are in Italy. Italy is, Mr. Ragusa didn't mention it, but Italy is actually a very difficult market to penetrate in terms of foreign companies. But these 4 companies have actually invested in in Italy. In fact, this one here, Investec, is based in Milan. It's an asset management company that targets high net worth individuals. And this one here, Sasol, has to do with chemical matters. They're going to open their new plant in Augusta. Augusta is there in the region, down south in Sicily. So they're going to open a branch there in a very near future. And for companies that want to invest in South Africa, we have quite a number of structures and institutions that can provide assistance. And this ranges from the South African Embassy here, as well as the Italian Embassy in Pretoria, plus the consulates spread across the country. But we also have the Italian Trade Agency, which is based in Johannesburg, as well as SACE and the Italy-South Africa Chamber of Commerce. So if any company wants to branch out in South Africa, you can be assured that there's already support, and there's a database of all the companies you can contact for recommendata. And then, ladies and gentlemen, this is just a summary of bilateral trade between South Africa and Italy. These are the statistics from 2014 to 2015. And as you can see, from South Africa, we export to Italy different types of minerals. We export hides and skins for the handbags and shoes, as well as iron ores and coal. But I must also say that we are also exporting a number of fruits and vegetables. If you go to Conard or Tigre or Carrefour, you'll find quite a number of South African fresh produce. And from Italy, we also import machinery, vehicles, electrical equipment, pharmaceutical products, and other products that Italy is exporting across the world. The other aspect of the presentation that I'm going to go through very briefly is different opportunities that we have for companies. As I've already mentioned, our industry is quite diverse, and because of the growth of the middle class, there's quite a boom in South Africa in terms of infrastructure development. I mean, every time I go home, I see a new building or a new structure. I was there in July, and then after July, I went in October. Between July and October, there were about 3 malls in one of our biggest economic hub. The region is called Gauteng. There were already 3 malls that were not there in July, but were there now in October. So this is just an example of how the construction and infrastructure development sector is growing in South Africa. And of course, there are also opportunities in some of the sectors that are mentioned here. We also have a boom in terms of tourism, green economy, and the blue economy. I think it's important to mention green economy because, like I've already mentioned in the previous slide, quite a number of Italian companies have partnered with South Africans in terms of renewable energy sector. And the last aspect of my presentation, ladies and gentlemen, is how can we work together? How can we work together to make sure that we understand your culture, you understand ours, and we can possibly build a business relationship? It's very simple, very, very simple. We can work together by building a relationship. You build a relationship with the institutions that I've mentioned, but most importantly, you can even do your research over the internet, and you will see that if you build a relationship, then you have a high possibility of succeeding in doing business in South Africa. I thank you.